Okay, it's time to actually open up Oxygen and start getting a good idea of what it looks like and how it feels to work in Oxygen. Now, there is a lot to cover, and yes, learning new software can be confusing and hard. But in this one, the good news is you don't need to do anything. I'm just going to talk you through what everything is and where it lives. So go grab a cup of coffee or whatever you want, sit back and just watch this one. All right, let's get stuck into it. So to get into the Oxygen Builder, there are a couple of ways that we can get in here. We can go over any of these templates and we can click edit. It will take us to a screen that looks like this, or we can click edit Oxygen. From pages and posts, the same sort of window appears, or from this template screen, we can click edit with Oxygen and it will just take us directly into that template. Now for this one, we're not really going to do anything that we're going to save. So we're just going to go through and run through the interface. So I'm just going to jump into this one. Let's go. So you can see now we have Oxygen loading. This is the builder. This might be the first time you've seen this. It might not be. But what we're going to do here is run through what the actual user interface is and where everything lives. The first thing you notice is you've got three sections. You've got this left-hand section, a top bar, and this white area, which is essentially, think of this as your canvas or your working space. It's essentially where anything that you're building renders the same way as it will on the website. I'm going to try and go through this in order. So we'll start with the top bar and we'll go from left to right. So this add here, when you click this, it'll actually change this left-hand element, or this left-hand panel, sorry, and we'll go through what those settings are in a minute. This hide section here simply closes this panel, and I would never close this panel, but really all it's doing is giving you more working space. But really, to actually change or edit any of the things, you need this open. So I always have this open. Here we've got this section previewing. Now what this is at the moment it's selected as front page, but if you have multiple pages that are in the site or posts or even things like archives, you can select these here and it will actually display the content that you've designed. It will relate that back to that page. So if you have an area where you want the content to be displayed or a featured image to be displayed, you can select the page that you want to be previewing to make sure that what you're building is loading the right stuff and looks accurate. Now there's this gap in the middle here. This does change. So all of these panels are sort of dynamic and do change depending on what we've clicked and what we're actually working on. When we've added text, you'll see that there's some text options, styling options that come up here, and I'll show you that when we work with text. And also you'll get a little panel that comes up here when your sidebars and stuff, or if you're working on a screen that's too large and your content goes beyond this sort of viewable window, it will give you the ability to sort of lock the scroll at 100% or scale it down. And I'll show you that in an example when we get to it. Now, one thing we're missing here, and it nearly is always something that I have open, is this right-hand panel. And we can get to that right-hand panel by any of these by clicking Structure, History, Manage. There's a few settings under here. So let's just open that up by clicking Structure. So now we have this right-hand panel, and I'll explain what goes in there in a second, but we'll stick with this header for now. So if we click History, and you'll see this right-hand panel change, it's actually going to give us the undos that we can make and go backwards and forwards with any, like a list of all the updates we've done. Or you can hit backwards and forwards like edit and undo and redo. Manage is essentially some of the core settings that are inside the actual builder part. So things like global styles and style sheets, and we'll go through these in detail. The last thing here we've got is a way to get back to either the admin, so back to WordPress itself, or to jump to the front end and preview what we're working on. Generally when I'm working, I'll have another tab open like this, but with the actual page where I'm trying to preview it, just so I don't need to click this and jump in and out of Oxygen itself. And lastly, of course, I said lastly before, but this is the save button. So anytime we've done some work and we want to actually save it, we click save and that actually saves all the progress that we've made. So that is the top section. Let's have a quick look through this right-hand section. So like I said, we've got structure, and you see that this has changed to history. So if I go back to structure, what this does is it lists all the things in the page as we start to build them. And you'll see this happen, and I will explain this, but if you put in an element here, such as an image, it will say body, and then the image will be in there. And if we put text underneath it, we'll say text underneath it. And if we put a div or something like that, you can put it inside and it will show you them actually all stacked in their structure. Now with history, we already looked at that. Manage, we've got a few things to go through here, but I will explain these in detail. But what we're going to look at now is we're going to do a proper walkthrough of the global styles in another video. But this is how you just get to them and what this sort of screen does. So we've got manage, we've got style sheets, and you can create a style sheet from here. These are for custom style sheets, and we are going to do a video on that as well. And I'll show you what happens when we add a style sheet, because this does affect this panel. So I'll wait for a second before we go over to this. And then selectors, which is similar to style sheets. I guess it's an advanced style or custom style sheet thing that you may want to look at later in the course. So that's essentially what happens in this right-hand panel. The main thing you generally look at here is stuff like the structure and these settings, and occasionally you'll be going to style sheets if we're doing custom style sheet stuff. All right, now if we go back over to this right or left-hand panel and we click add, you'll see that this totally changes. And this essentially shows us all of the components that we can add to the site that are default in Oxygen. And we're going to walk through these in detail, but I'm just showing you what happens in this panel here. And we've got a few different options for these. And you can search via type. So let's say we wanted to put in, I guess, inner content. You can type that in up the top here and get to that inner content. So once you know what these components do, you may use that search to get to them, but they're fairly well grouped together. And like I said, we're going to do a full rundown of these components. So we'll save that for now. But what I will show you is if we start to add some stuff, how the interface starts to change and what's going on. So let's put something in like a section. You'll see that this whole part here changes, and this is to do with the styling of this section. And you'll also notice that the structure over here changes, and what you're seeing is that section has been added. So if we add something else, for example, like another section, you can see that they've both been added, and we can put something inside. So I select this top section, and I put something inside that, like a heading. You'll see that now we can open up this section and see the heading inside of that. Now in this structure, you can actually click and drag stuff from place to place. So we can put that heading inside of that section, for example. So that's how this structure works. And we'll go back to this left-hand panel here. And I'm just going to select this top section. And you can see what we've got here is essentially, and this is something that I really like about Oxygen, that for any of the things that you have, we've got like a primary panel, which are the things that control the most standard things that you need for that type of component, such as the text. You'll see if I select this, it changes. So it gives me stuff like the font family, the text color, for example. If I select a section, it's going to give me things like the background color and alignment. Now, the other good thing is that under advanced, we've got all of these styling options, which looks like a lot of stuff. But really, the thing that's great about this is they remain consistent. So it doesn't matter if I'm selecting text and I go to advanced, it's the same options here as if I'm selecting a div or an image, and we get to them the same way. So we'll go through these in advance and how they actually work. All we're looking at the moment is how these panels sort of interact with each other. We're not going to do all the styling yet, but I'm just making sure you understand the functions that are in these panels. We've also got stuff here like you've got your advanced, for example. So you can go from your advanced tab to your primary sort of settings. So things like your background color. And we're going to do a full rundown through this. I'm just showing you how this stuff changes. And this here, this little part across the top here, that shows I guess a desktop. This is actually how you style stuff for, different screen sizes. And you can set the screen sizes that you want. But if we select this, you'll see how the stuff is changing. The actual, I guess, this canvas area or the display that we've got is changing size in relationship to a screen size. So we can start to see how you may change things. So for example, on a smaller size, you might want to change this section to a different color. I probably wouldn't, but just as an example, you can see that now on that screen size, it's blue, and larger, it's red. So that's how you start to do some of this mobile stuff. That's what's going on there. Along here, I'm quickly going to go back to desktop, all devices. Along here, what we've got here is something called your ID, and we can also add classes. So if we click this, we can add a class. Now, an ID, if you don't know anything about HTML or CSS, an ID is essentially an identifier for anything on the page. And there's only meant to be one ID with the same number. Oxygen automatically generates an ID. So every time you add one, it will give you a new unique name. But you can change this to anything you want. So I could call this, for example, header section, and that would become the ID for that. You can also add classes, and you can add multiple classes to anything, which you might call something like red, because this has a red background. And then if we're styling this stuff red, for example, if we add anything else in here, such as a div, and we can then choose to type in red, and it will take on the same properties. So that's something to do with classes, and we're going to go through that in detail, but really that's where that stuff is. We've got a few other things here, like a delete. We've got a duplicate. So if you've got something here and you want to duplicate that, click duplicate and it will make another copy, and you can drag that around. You can click delete, which will delete it. Select something again. We've got this, which is a links property. So if something by default doesn't have links on it, and when we select linking, it'll add a link wrapper around it. So I click that, and now this becomes a link. I can link to anything like normal in WordPress, but you'll see this heading now has a link wrapper on it. So that might be a way that you want to add links, and there's a few ways that we can do that, and we'll go through those in detail. But that's really what that panel is doing, this feature here is doing. And I'm going to undo that. And this last thing here is something called conditions. It's condition settings in Oxygen. And this allows you to show and hide stuff depending on certain stuff that's going on. So for example, you could say show and hide based on conditions. And then you can set a condition like if someone is logged on, if the author is this, if it's this date. And we'll do some examples of this in the course. But just so you know, that's where conditions are and that's where they live. So again, you'll see that this section has changed now, because I put a condition on there. So I want to get rid of that. I'll just undo that. I'm going to get rid of that. So we're back to how we were. Now, this section, I haven't shown you everything that happens in this section. And that's to do when we add stuff like some style sheets. So we're going to add a style sheet and I'll show you what happens here. Oh, quickly, what I'll show you here is with the text, how I mentioned before, that the text here gives you some styling above. Now, you can get to all of this sort of styling in here, for example, typography, and you can do, different sorts of alignment. So let's, for example, add a few text breaks in here. You can align this stuff to the left or the right, and you could do that also up here. So it's just giving you an easy way to get to some of this stuff, such as bolding and, links and stuff like that. So that's where that lives. This here, insert data, allows you to put some dynamic stuff in there. So if you want to reference like a page title, you go like this, post title, insert, and it's displaying this code here. But really it's picking up home, which is our front page. And this is the perfect example. So if I selected a different page, like an About Us page, this title here would change to About Us. So this is where you want to change this previewing option here. All right, now let's have a look at style sheets. I was just about to talk about that. So if we open up here, manage, and go to style sheets, you'll see that we can add a style sheet. I'm going to call this custom. And we might not be using style sheets in this. I'm going to do some stuff for doing your own style sheets, but in general, we're going to be styling stuff with the point and click system rather than creating our own styles. But what I wanted to point out with this is actually where your CSS would live if you're creating custom stuff. And also you'll notice that I pointed out before how that we got this zoom control. So what it's doing now is this panel, because it's so large, is scaling the website down in this sort of inner content part, this preview of the website. And you can actually click the padlock and it will force it to be 100%. Now, to get to some of the stuff, like if we had something over this side of it, you will need to sort of scroll across to get to that. But this gives you an accurate, I guess, idea of the scale. Whereas if we click this, unclick the padlock and it scales down, it gives you a good idea of, how much we can actually see. And it's got a percentage there. And you'll see that if we change this browser window, the size is actually changing depending on how much space is there. So you can't actually change this percentage to zoom in differently. You've essentially got the amount of space and it's telling you what percentage you zoomed in at, or you can click the padlock and force it to load at 100%, but you are restricted to the amount of space you can see. So that's a quick walkthrough of the interface. What I'm going to do is just sort of close the style sheet. So if I go back to structure and I select something like any of these items, we're going back to this normal mode. So it's essentially clicking these elements depending on what you have selected. That's the really important part here, that what we're selecting and what we're looking at changes what is going on in all of these panels, mainly the left-hand panel and the right-hand panel, apart from your scaling and your text, which happens in the top part. And we'll finish up this little overview of the interface and keep this course and this lesson moving along. There you go. That wasn't too bad at all. So now you should have a much better idea of what Oxygen actually looks like and what it's going to feel like to work with. So, you know what the time is? It's time to click complete and we'll move on to the next lesson.